It's the Boris Dirk podcast. This week, Karl Anthony Towns became a New York Knick, traded to New York for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, a first round pick that is so deeply protected it may never be conveyed. But more importantly, Sam Klotz, Max's older brother, got married. And Max, before we get into the implications of this trade for Minnesota, for New York, for the East, for the West, take me through the range of emotions as you leave. I think it was your brother's Friday night wedding dinner.
So we're on the way from the rehearsal dinner to the welcome cocktails on my brother's weekend wedding. About a 10-minute drive, like not that much. Theoretically should be able to happen in those 10 minutes in the course of an entire NBA offseason. Maybe if Woj was still working, this would have broken earlier and it wouldn't have derailed me so much. But yeah, we're driving. First, I get a text from friend of the show, Andy Godnick, Coach God, says, OMG, sorry, Max. And I look, I'm like, okay, there's no way the Knicks did something. I assumed it was like some niche player that I was, in love with in the draft who had been cut or something. And I look and it's this blockbuster deal on the day before media day. Towns for Randall and DiVincenzo. And honestly, I delayed processing for the entire weekend just because I was best man at the wedding. I had a lot of logistical responsibilities. I couldn't really wrap my head around it, though I tried. But the first thought that hit me was, well, A, I can't believe the Knicks are doing this on Sam's wedding weekend. This is absurd. B, Dante DiVincenzo, he's in the deal. And then I just kind of spiraled from there. And I've kind of, you're gonna fair warning, you're gonna hear a lot of rationalizing in this podcast. I've kind of come around to the Knicks' perspective on this deal and some of the logic behind it, but it was just such a tidal wave of shock. And really, I'd just been sort of like, working my way through the existing Knicks team, and then it just gets completely turned upside down the day before training camp.
Despite Towns' name being mentioned by Knicks fans for a couple of years now, despite both Towns and Randall being trade machine favorites in recent history, the trade somehow came as a massive shock, at least to me. It felt like the biggest Woj bomb. I guess it wasn't a Woj bomb. The biggest Shams bomb since, I don't know, Paul George to the Clippers. I think just due to the success of the 2024 playoff Wolves, the 2024 January Knicks, Julius Randle's honorable commitment to and love for the city of New York, it just smacked me in the face. And I was at a wedding of my own. And yeah, I totally thought it was NBA Centel, not Central. Truly a wild, memorable blockbuster trade. Let's get into the implications. And for Minnesota, I really don't get it. How the hell are you going to play Randall and Gobert together? I mean, Naz Reid played 22.6 minutes per game in the playoffs this past year. And this feels like a trade you only make if you feel like Naz has another leap in him. But lineups with Naz, Randall, and Gobert are too sluggish offensively and potentially defensively as well. Like, have you found a rationalization in your head from the Minnesota perspective?
The only way it makes sense to me from Minnesota's side is as a financial flexibility move rather than a basketball move, because I'll get into the basketball part of it, but it only makes sense if they're trying to get off of Towns' deal, which is big. It's in the high 40s this year, then the 50s. Eventually, it ends up around 60 million, which is an insane number, even with the rising cap. He's going to be making like close to twice as much as Jalen Brunson in the course of their current contracts at a certain point. And yeah, but so if they just want to like get off that deal to preserve their future flexibility, have two contracts that are more easily tradable on their own than Karl Anthony Towns is on his own, I guess I see that. And maybe they saw in the Dallas series, like this team played out of its mind to beat Denver and was not going to beat Dallas in that series and probably not Boston in the series after. So maybe they rationalized it as they were a little further away from a championship than they thought, and it was better just to preserve future flexibility. From a basketball perspective, and I've had a complicated relationship with Julius Randle over the past several years. He is going into a really bad offensive environment for his skill set. Like, I had hopes for Julius Randle in New York this year because there was going to be a lot of spacing with some of their small ball lineups. I thought he'd be able to rumble to the basket a little bit more, lean into his inner Punisher, Zion, Giannis type of basketball. Not that he's near those level of player, but that he can just attack the rim relentlessly, use his strength, his athletic gifts, his touch around the basket. There's not going to be nearly as much space on this Minnesota team as there will be on this Knicks team this year. Like, he's going to be rolling towards the basket where Rudy Gobert is going to be sitting. And we saw in the playoffs, teams saw what Dallas did. They're going to have their bigs roam off of Rudy Gobert, clog up Minnesota's offense. And Randall's not going to have that space in the lane to really operate. And I think it's just going to force him into his worst tendencies of, the ill-advised step back jumpers, the mid-range fadeaways, all that stuff that happens when the offense gets bogged down. And it's going to put a ton of shot creation pressure on Anthony Edwards, where the spacing environment is going to be worse than it's been at any point in the time that he's been there, because he's had Cat there the whole time, who's one of the best spacers in the NBA. And yeah, so I really don't get it for Minnesota. The other piece of it is Dante. And I think it's reasonable that they could view him as taking contracts into account the best asset in the deal. But I also don't know if you can play Edwards and Dante like as your backcourt together as your 2-3. Like, it doesn't really quite feel right. So if you're doing all this just to get like a really good 6-man when you already have Naz Reid as your 6-man, like that doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. So my initial reaction was that I didn't like it for either team. I've now rationalized the Knicks perspective of it, but I have not been able to rationalize the T-Wolves perspective.
Same here, unfortunately. It's more fun when we vehemently disagree. But even though I don't like this deal for Minnesota, as you pointed out, I did have them as my 9th favorite contender going into the season. And I continue to believe last year was an outlier outcome that they'd really, really struggle to replicate in 2025. Clearly, they agree with me on that. And while I love the stretchiness, the electric shooting, and energy DiVincenzo will add to their backcourt, they traded away the best 3-point shooting big in the world to get him. And big man shooting is a particularly premium skill. I disagree with you. Like, I think you can play DiVincenzo and Edwards at the 2 and the 3. Like, I think that's enough size. It's hard with an aging Mike Conley. Like, then you start to have some questions. I thought DiVincenzo defensively was really awesome for the Knicks most of last year. And so, like, it's another energizer, like, switchable defender for the most part. I'm okay with DiVincenzo guarding most 1s, 2s, and 3s. It's once you get a little bigger than that he's a little more questionable just due to the size limitations. He doesn't have a great wingspan. But yeah, I just don't see the vision. Because it's the Randall and Gobert pairing that really makes absolutely no sense to me on offense. And when I first saw the trade, I assumed that Randall was going somewhere else. I still wouldn't be shocked if they rerouted him,
Yeah.
or if this just isn't the final chess move for Minnesota. Because even though defensively it might be a nightmare, like a Randall Towns front court pairing makes a lot of sense offensively. Like, it would be pretty fun to see what Randall could do with the spacing created by Karl Anthony Towns. Of course, now he's stuck there with Gobert and Naz Reid, who seems to be commanding more and more minutes with each passing season. Let's talk about like the implications in the West just briefly. I think the Nuggets have got to be smiling because Minnesota's too big look was Denver's kryptonite. Towns absorbed the backdowns from Jokic. Gobert would wait back to swallow everything at the rim. And the guards and wings, they're athletes. McDaniels, Edwards just kind of flew around. And altogether, they took the air out of Denver's offense in that breathtaking round 2 last year.
Yeah.
They also took the air out of me watching from my couch because I picked Denver to win it all. Although I did pick Denver over Minnesota in 7, so I'm not going to stop podcasting. But is there anything else in the West? I don't think it's a novel take that this is good news for Denver, who I think a lot of people expected to take a step back, and maybe now like they have a little extra wind in their sails heading into the regular season. Like, what does this do for the West outlook, in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, I think Minnesota, they're behind OKC. I'm growing stronger and stronger in my conviction that OKC is just the clear number 1 favorite in the West.
Yeah.
And then I think they're also firmly behind Denver and Dallas. I don't think that they can score enough to keep up with either of them. And I think their defense, specifically their defensive strategy against Denver, as you outlined, took a hit. Towns and Randall are very different kind of defenders. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. I'm not sure who I'd say is a better defender. They both, can be deployed in certain ways and also can really be taken advantage of in certain ways. But Randall is not going to be able to hold up one-on-one in the post against Jokic like Towns was able to do. I would not be surprised if Naz Reid is closing more games than not. If they keep Randall around and they don't reroute him to a third team, but yeah, I'd put them firmly behind Dallas and Denver just because I don't think they can score with them. Minnesota was 17th in offense last year and just got rid of their best floor spacer, and one of the best floor spacers in the league, particularly from the big position. And I don't see them making any, they were the best defense in the league last year. I don't think they're going to be better than that this year. So they're
Yeah.
probably going to slip from the number one defense. And I think they're probably going to slip from the 17th offense, although their bench, I think, is really good. So yeah, once you get past Dallas, Denver, OKC, like then there's kind of a group of we'll see that I would put Minnesota in. I'd probably put them towards the top of that group, especially if Edwards continues progressing. And I do think their bench is as I mentioned, going to be really good with Alexander Walker. I assume DiVincenzo's coming off the bench, even though I think in a vacuum he's a better player than McDaniels, but I just don't think with their team construct you can start him over McDaniels. Naz Reid, who's one of the better bench players in the league, and Joe Ingles running the show, and maybe some young guys pop, but I just don't see how they can have a good playoff offense with having lost Towns because he opened up so much stuff for them on the offensive end. And I'd probably put them behind Memphis as well in terms of contenders. So like at that
Yeah.
point, you're fifth in the West in terms of do I think you can win it? That's not a great place to be with their contract situation.
Yeah, despite Minnesota's playoff overachievement, I feel like there was definitely a deficiency in passing creativity. There aren't like a lot of great passers on this team. And to your point, like in a dream world, you'd just be able to play like the switchable athletic lineup of Edwards, McDaniels, and DiVincenzo all on the floor at the same time. But it seems like they really need Conley to get things going, or a guy
Yeah.
like that. Minnesota certainly would have benefited from a couple of the moves that Phoenix made this offseason, going and getting Monte Morris and Tyus Jones, just like more guys to unstick your offense. Now, I think in a vacuum, we'd agree Julius Randle's a better passer than Karl Anthony Towns, but everything takes time with Julius. And that was often the issue with Minnesota's playoff offense. It just takes time. They don't have a lot of the quickest processors, especially once you get to the cream of the crop in the postseason. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Julius is part of their long-term plans. He is turning 30 very soon. He has a player option in 25, 26 for 30 million. This year, are you really gonna pay a guy 30 million to be like your sixth man? Does Naz Reid go from sixth man to your starting four? And Julius Randle is kind of like the Naz Reid of the last couple of years for them. I don't
Yep.
know.
Yeah. And the last thing I'd throw in for Minnesota is I think it puts a big burden on Jaden McDaniels as well to really take a step forward as a shot creator, which I'm not 100% sure if he can do because especially if just the spacing environment doesn't work with Randall on the court and they have to play a lot of, staggering Randall and Gobert and these sorts of things. Like, who's the second shot creator in those
Yeah.
situations? You've got Edwards and then Conley, like running pick and roll with Gobert. Is that your second offensive priority? Like, that's not great. Or is Naz Reid or McDaniels going to take a big step in terms of being able to create their own shot and not just attack against scrambling defense? So I'm curious to see where Minnesota goes from here, and if they like where this offensive pop is going to come from on this roster, because that it was ultimately what undid them last year. And as I said, teams were watching Dallas. They saw, okay, put Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford on Rudy Gobert and have him not guard him, and then just roam and muck up everything at the rim. And it totally took away everything that Minnesota was doing against Denver in that second round series, and they just couldn't score against Dallas. And conversely, you saw in the finals what happens when you can't have your center camp in the lane because the Celtics have a 5-out system where Al Horford and at times Porzingis was pulling Dallas's center away from the basket. Their defense looked a lot less formidable than it did against a team like Minnesota, and that's purely the effect of shooting and particularly big shooting, which Minnesota just isn't going to have in that same way this year.
Yeah, the more I look at it, there just has to be another move. Like someone in the Minnesota front court has to be going out because McDaniels, Randall, Naz Reid, and Gobert, like four of your six best players are inconsistent floor spacers at their very best, like it's just not sustainable 2024 playoff basketball.
Yeah.
It'll be wild. And it makes me think also DiVincenzo has a massive playoff role ahead of him. All right, let's talk about the Knicks, who now will start Karl Anthony Towns at the five, presumably. A few numbers before we jump into this. Towns at the five in the regular season was actually really good this past year. Lineups with Towns at the five during the regular season had just about the same net rating as the Wolves closing five with Gobert included. But Towns at the five in the playoffs for Minnesota, albeit in only 177 minutes, but it's a lot of playoff minutes, was minus 40. So Towns as an anchor of your defense in the playoffs in recent memory, not too good. He averaged 0.2 blocks in his 33 minutes per game through Minnesota's three playoff rounds this past run. Non-factor in terms of rim protection, which is, that's partly schematic. Like that was his job, especially versus Denver, was to either body rim attackers or funnel them towards Rudy Gobert. So, but still, like 0.2 blocks is crazy. SGA averaged 1.7 blocks per game in the playoffs. Crazy stat that I didn't notice until preparing today. But I do really believe Towns took a step as a playoff player this past season, albeit with less of a role than he had in previous round one and outs that Minnesota had during his tenure. In terms of turnovers, like I feel like that was a huge part of the Towns as a liability conversation. And this past year, Towns got the turnovers under control. He averaged 4.5 turnovers per game in round one versus Memphis in 2022. It was like brutal, really just giving away the ball, possession after possession, flailing, getting two fouls in the first quarter, like all the worst Town things that have plagued him throughout his career. In 2023, round one versus Denver, 3.6 turnovers per game. This year, he cut that in half. He was at about 1.7 turnovers per game on a much larger sample, Minnesota's path to the conference finals, and just generally looked like a better decision maker with some real defensive moments. Again, some moments he was totally on skates, but like he's a 7 foot, 270-pound man. Like this is to be expected. I think Towns has grown a lot, has shown a willingness to like settle into not being the guy on a playoff team and still finding ways to contribute in a meaningful way. Towns at the five for the playoff Knicks. What are you thinking?
So the first thing, and I said this after they traded for Mikal Bridges, that they were trying to replicate what Boston has, and this is just further confirmation of that. They are really just completely following the Boston model of five out. You have to guard everyone on the floor, and everyone on the floor can dribble, pass, shoot, punish you if you're closing out. Their offense, I think, is going to be one of the best offensive ecosystems in the NBA. You have Towns, who's a career 40% three-point shooter and on volume as well, and off the dribble from deep. Like he's one of the most versatile shooting bigs we've ever seen. I'm not going to say he's the best shooting big of all time. That's Dirk Nowitzki, but he's the best currently operating shooting big. That's for sure. Similar volume to Porzingis last year, higher percentage in a worse spacing environment. So you imagine in a better spacing environment where there's more driving and kicking, he'd be able to get better looks and more looks. You have Brunson, who gets into the paint at will already last year with two of the worst spacing centers in the league, particularly Mitchell Robinson. But like the Knicks at no point put out a center that teams, guarded outside of the paint. Hartenstein, Robinson, Achua, Sims, none of those guys are being guarded outside of the paint. I saw some tweet about basically like center floor stretching index, or they made some metric up for it, and the Knicks were last. And now they have the best floor spacing big in the league. You have Mikal Bridges, who's a 38% three-point shooter on volume for his career, and you expect that to be high, at least towards the high end of what he's capable of in a good spacing environment. OG Anunoby, who was a 39% fairly volume three-point shooter last year, and then Hart, who's the weakest spacer of the bunch, but had shown he can knock him down when it counts. And even if teams don't guard him, he's going to wreak havoc, crashing the offensive glass and all these different things. So offensively, I'm pretty confident they're going to be a top five offense in the league. I'm not, and I think Jalen Brunson's poised to have one of the best scoring and most efficient scoring seasons of his career because he's never operated in this level of space before. And the big question is then if you have a top five offense, can you just have a top 10 defense with Towns as your five and Brunson as your one? And that is a valid question. I'm not sure the answer is yes. If it was going to be yes, you'd want to surround him with A to A plus defenders at the 2, 3, and 4, which they have in Hart, Bridges, and Anunoby. Like their perimeter contained between those three guys should be among the best of any team in the league outside of Boston and OKC and Orlando. But they should at least have one of the more viable 2, 3, 4 perimeter contain options with Hart, OG, and Bridges. And then it's just Towns. Can you just like not sink us? Can you be vertical at the rim? Can you rebound the ball? And that's a question, honestly, because I have a very low opinion of Towns' defense. There's been some buzz from like John Krasinski, who's the beat writer for the Timberwolves, about his defense being a bit underrated, which I'm open to. But the fouls are a concern, all these different things. But I think the offense is going to be absolutely dynamite, and they're taking that Boston model of guys are going to be driving, the defense is going to be scrambling, and it's just going to be open threes galore for these guys. So yeah, the big question is just can their defense be in the top third of the league, which we'll see. I think I'd be surprised if it was close to 5. I'd be very surprised, but I do think it has a chance to be around 10.
Yeah, again, like I'm not blaming only Towns for the crazy low block rate. I just mentioned it because like look at the last 8 teams in the playoffs this past year. The Wolves had Gobert. The Nuggets had Jokic, who's not a crazy rim protector, but like does certain things on defense and is also the best player in the world. The Mavs had Gafford and Lively. The Thunder had Chat. And as I mentioned, SGA averaged 1.7 blocks per game somehow in the playoffs. In the East, the Celtics had Porzingis, Horford, a sprinkle of Tillman. The Knicks had Hardenstein and Mitch Robb, obviously two great rim protectors. Hardenstein, one of the best in the league, now on your potential title pick. The Pacers had Miles Turner and Isaiah Jackson, and the Cavs had Mobley and Allen. Like every team has at least one really viable rim protector, shot changer. And that's why I'm saying, well, I love the way Towns fits in offensively. Surely New York has another deal to make, and if Mitch Robb is going out, a healthy center better be coming in.
Yeah.
You just need the options at the rim.
Yeah, I kind of hope they play Mitch, like particularly against, or they keep Mitch, particularly against a team like Philly. I think it would be smart to throw out that double big look at times and do like a starting lineup of Brunson, Bridges, OG, Towns, and Mitch, and that's still 4 volume, 40% 3-point shooters and a rolling center. Like I think that's still workable offensively, and then that is just so much size defensively. Like talk about, I mean, Mikal Bridges damn near 7-foot wingspan. I might be exaggerating, but he's got a big wingspan. OG's huge for a 3. Towns is like big enough to be a 5 and playing at the 4, and then Mitch is one of the bigger centers in the league. Like I hope they keep that to be able to have that look to go to, and as you say, if they do trade Mitch, that they get someone else in return. Um, but yeah, there is no doubt the Knicks' depth took a massive hit, and it's kind of crazy because it was just like they gave up 2 players and got 1 player, but somehow I'm like way less confident in their depth now than I was before. Um, before I was thinking, all right, they're bringing DiVincenzo and Josh Hart off the bench. Like those are probably the best 6th, 7th guys in the league. And now they don't have DiVincenzo and they're starting Hart. So now they're 6th, 7th guys. There's a chance they start McBride or Precious, but let's assume they're starting Hart. Then their 6th, 7th guys are McBride, who I really like, but he's probably more suited as like a 8th guy than a 6th or 7th guy, and Mitch, who's solid but always hurt. And then it gets a little bit more sketchy with Precious, and then you hope one of the rookies pops, but or Shamit. But I think we're in the year 2024.
Yeah.
We're done relying on Shamit as being a reliable playoff contributor for more than a game. Probably same with Campaign as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, the depth definitely took a hit. Maybe you can surf the buyout market. Maybe, and this makes them taking so many rookies in this past draft also make a little bit more sense, because I was thinking, okay, we're gonna have one of the best, G League rookie classes of all time, because they're none of them are gonna get minutes. But now it's like, all right, Kolek, Kevin McCullough, if he's healthy. I think Dadier is probably a little bit too raw, but Kolek and McCullough, you guys could be playing real minutes this year, particularly early in the year when the rotation is thinner. So yeah, but the starting lineup I think is dynamite. Like it's one of the best starting
Yeah.
lineups in the league. After OKC and Boston, I think they've got an argument for being right there. So yeah, it's a lot to wrap the head around.
I think what's a little bit scary is just that you traded two really good positional defenders for a poor positional defender. Again, a shooter of Towns' caliber at the five, which you could argue has never existed before, is an insanely premium NBA skill that opens up your offense in all sorts of ways. And so I totally agree with you that there's this clear path to an elite offense for the Knicks. But you mentioned the way that their roster construction now is mirroring Boston more and more. Like Porzingis's versatility defensively had as much to do with, Boston's closing lineup taking another step as, his floor spacing did. And so that's just the scary side of Karl Anthony Towns. And, I've seen a lot of noise since the trade was made about how this helps the Knicks in a theoretical Boston matchup. Can you explain that to me a little bit? Just because I don't know, man, like the switchability of Boston's offense just would scare the crap out of me getting Towns on an island, picking their matchups the way they tend to do.
So I think it helps them because they have a chance of scoring with them. Like
Yeah.
the previous Knicks regiment, I think it would have been a tall task for them to perform like a top 2 or 3 offense. And this one, I'm pretty confident will be top 5. And if you're top 5, I think you have a chance to be top 2 or 3. Like they have a chance to be one of the best offenses in the league with their spacing environment, the level of engine that Brunson has shown he can be in really adverse circumstances. And now with this sort of ideal, spacing garden around
Yeah.
him, I'm expecting that'll be better. Defensively, for sure, concerns. But I don't know if I guess playing Randall at the 5 would make them more switchable than having Towns out there, but I'm not sure that that's a huge downgrade. And Mitch at the 5, I think would has shown to be untenable against Boston because he can't get out to Kristaps in the way that is necessary to prevent him from firing away. So Towns is certainly, I think, more switchable than Robinson is. He's a much worse rim protector and not as good of a rebounder, though he's like a fine rebounder.
Yeah.
Obviously, Hartenstein would have been the ideal as kind of a more mobile perimeter big who can defend. I think the offense is better with Towns than it is with Hartenstein. The defense would be way better with Hartenstein than it is with Towns. So we'll see which
Yeah.
one of those holds more weight. But yeah, it all comes down to the offense, I think, and its potential to be ballistic as what positions them better with Boston.
I also think a huge part of the Knicks' success last year and an underrated piece of Hartenstein's value was the offense, like the handoffs, the creation, the floaters. I feel like Hartenstein really got his flowers in the mainstream for the defensive stuff, but all the ways he kind of oiled up their offense was kind of I get maybe harder to spot for the casuals. His left-handed floaters became sort of beloved by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I do think it's big that they lose Hardenstein, but now they're getting tremendous offensive production, albeit in a very different way from the center position. Like that is huge because Hardenstein was their secondary point guard in a lot of the most important moments of last season. You mentioned the rookies, like Kevin McCullough was a top 20 talent in this draft. Like I remember when you first watched him and you couldn't long before you knew he was going to be a New York Knick, flirting with keeping Kevin McCullough in your lottery. And he falls all the way deep into the second round. Or was it undrafted or was it I think
It was like
deep.
56.
Yeah, it was like right before the draft ended, they snagged Kevin McCullough because he's got these injury concerns. If Kevin McCullough is remotely healthy, like he's gonna turn 24 during his rookie year. He's a grown ass man with like real cojones. Like I think there's a chance that he can actually really contribute almost like a rookie Christian Brown type role. Like I do
Yeah.
think Kevin McCullough is that good. Is his lower body gonna let him do it? Not sure. But Kevin McCullough is so skilled and such a smart, savvy defender that if there's ever a rookie that Tibbs is gonna give a chance to play any minutes, it's a guy like him.
Yeah. And I comped him to like being somewhere between Josh Green and Josh Hart. Like So
Yeah.
sort of in that like bench wing realistically, but if things go well, he could be like a fifth starter kind of wing. Um,
Yeah, he
but
plugs holes. He plugs holes.
he cuts really well. He passes really well for an off-ball player. He's a good rebounder for his size, draws a tons of fouls, plays with a high motor, really physical. Only maybe slight weakness is the outside shot, but like it doesn't look bad and he shoots really well from the free throw line. So like I think he has good touch. Maybe it's a mental thing where he's one of those guys that he just can't extend it to 3-point range, like DeRozan and Ingram. But
There
I
was,
really liked
yeah.
him. I ranked him 20th in the class, and I was ecstatic the Knicks got him at 56, unless there's like some medical thing I don't know about. But I I liked him even more than Kolek. I think he was
Yeah.
one of the higher ones relative to where they were drafted that I had.
There was some pre-draft buzz also that McCullough was like reworking his jumper, which could be good, could be bad. Always a
Yeah.
little bit scary to hear he's going into the operating room with the
Yeah.
jumper. But yeah, he's just the kind of guy who had enough skills that I think he has a chance. Okay. I still see the Knicks as right around where I had them before this trade, probably the second or third most dangerous team in the East. Is it different with you? How does this change the contender outlook for New York?
No, it hasn't changed anything for me. I thought they had the second best chance in the East to make the finals before the trade, and I still think they have the second best chance after the trade. Maybe it makes me slightly more hopeful in a series against Boston, but I would still definitely pick Boston to win that series because of the defensive edge that Boston has. It would just have to come down to like clutch time execution and Brunson just like out dueling whatever the Boston offensive machine spits out. Um, but yeah, I because they're in the East, I think the East is a little bit maybe easier. Actually, I don't even know if the East is easier to get to the finals than the West, but like, yeah, they're
It definitely feels like, yeah, I mean, the East just got a little shot in the arm, but it's your team that got the shot in the arm. So
mhm.
maybe I need to take a longer look at it. Maybe this gives the Knicks a slight boost. The only thing I know for sure after a few days of processing is that I think Minnesota got worse, and I'll be shocked if Minnesota doesn't have another significant move in the works. But really interesting. And the Knicks go from like this amazingly gritty, competitive team playing Josh Hart 48 minutes per game in the playoffs. Jalen Brunson bailing them out offensively when the offense just can't seem to create in the smooth ways, to a roster that looks like it could easily produce one of the best offenses in NBA history. Like it
Yeah,
just there's now just a really, really, really high level of shot making versatility on this next team. And I agree with you. I think the closing five can hang with absolutely anyone.
absolutely. And I I mean, I already think Brunson is somewhere between the sixth and 10th best player in the league. Um, I've been seeing a lot of lists that have him closer to like 15, or even like in between 15 and 20, which to me is insane after the playoff run he just had, and acting like it's just some sort of breakout last year. Like he did it the year before as well. And his last year in Dallas, he damn near knocked out Utah by himself when Luka was injured. So he has a proven track record of performing in the playoffs, even in really adverse circumstances. Like that Knicks roster, his first year there, it was is significantly worse than this roster here. And brings me to shouting out the Knicks front office and just some of the asset management they've done over the years. First of all, if you're deep into Knicks Twitter, which I am, you see all this analysis of like the cap machinations that they've done for how they executed these trades while still preserving their ability to be under the second apron, or like how they executed these trades while being in the second apron. I can't keep it straight exactly, but they did some cap hijinks, some wizardry that like they're just like exploiting all of the loopholes in the system. Um, and they've turned from the start of last year, their starting lineup was Brunson, Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. That was their starting lineup at the start of training camp last year. And now it's Jalen's still there. Instead of Quentin Grimes slash Dante DiVincenzo, you've got Mikal Bridges. That's an upgrade, even if maybe the price to pay wasn't worth it. That is an upgrade. You turned RJ Barrett into OG. That's an upgrade. You turned Julius Randle uh, or sorry, yeah, Josh Hart's in there, and then you turn Mitchell Robinson slash Hartenstein into Towns. Like they, as I've always said, Leon Rose's team building philosophy seems to be like reenacting the guy who traded the paperclip into the house. And that's what he's been doing. I'm not sure this is a more all in move. I'm not sure if this is like, a win on the margins and with the money and everything, but he clearly thinks Jalen Brunson's the guy to get him there and just put him in the best offensive environment he's ever been in. He can be the absolute engine for this team. And frankly, after seeing him in the playoffs last year and how hard he fought as the team just fell apart around him, I'm not going to doubt him. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And this front office has built up a lot of goodwill with their transactions over the years, and they've gotten the most out of almost everyone they've brought in. Like Dante DiVincenzo, people liked him as a signing, but people weren't saying he's like one of the best contracts in the NBA when they signed him. And then suddenly he's like a really valuable starter and being held as one of the best contracts in the NBA. Hardenstein was like, a nerd love as one of the best bench bigs out there. And now he's getting $30 million a year from OKC. Like they just really know how to scout and talent develop. And I don't know how it happened because the Knicks front office has been dysfunctional for decades, but I have built up just a huge amount of benefit of the doubt with them to this point.
Yeah, it's alchemy. We should mention as well that Tibbs has had some real success with Karl Anthony Towns, like the most robust cat stats we've seen, at least like raw counting stats, were under Tibbs at the start of his career. I'll leave it at that. I want you to take it home now. And before I give the mic to Max and we shut this down, I just want to say there are a lot of Knicks fans out there that wanted to see if the January thing was real, if it was, playoff translatable. And Eloise, I'm thinking of you. I'm sorry, but I'm sure you're gonna have a lot of fun with this new Knicks outfit.
Yeah, I was one of them. I was curious, like, can that be, the Denver run where they trade for Aaron Gordon and they go on this crazy run, and then Jamal Murray gets hurt and they don't actually get to see it for 2 years. I was curious if that was going to be the case where like we went on that crazy run, we get the guys back and we just hit the ground running. But yeah, first with just with the but all three of these players have a huge emotional connection to the places that they're leaving from for various reasons. Can't really speak as much to Towns in the Minnesota side of things, but obviously the team that drafted him #1 overall, he seemed like he was pretty blindsided by the deal. Excited to see what he brings to New York. From the New York side of things, Dante somehow became like a cult hero in a year of playing for the Knicks. I'm never going to forget that game 2 end of game scramble where he somehow ends up with the game winning three in a game the Knicks had no business winning. One of my favorite guys I've rooted for on the Knicks over the last several years, and definitely sad to see him go. And Julius Randle, uh, none of this foundation I think is here without that like out of nowhere playoff run that the Knicks had in 2021, where they're projected for like 23, 24 wins before the season, and Randall in that COVID 2021 season dragged this team to a 4 seed with a starting lineup around him of Elfrid Payton, RJ Barrett, Reggie Bullock, and I think still Mitchell Robinson. Like that, talk about a bad offensive environment. I don't know how that team was a 4 seed, but that really set kind of the foundation that they've built on from there. They had a down year the next year, and then they brought in Jalen Brunson, and it's just been like smooth sailing from there. Can't pretend it's been smooth the whole time. There was the whole thumbs down thing, like the up and down relationship with the fans, my up and down relationship with enjoying watching him, which was mostly down, but you can't deny just the raw production that he had and how he helped just bring the Knicks into a period of relevancy that they really hadn't had. I mean, I haven't been this excited for a Knicks team in my entire life, but the relevancy, maybe not since like the Melo days, but even then, there was never that level of like fervor and just like pure joy around the team that they had in the last couple of seasons. So yeah, I'm sad to see, or I'm sad that I'm not gonna be able to see if that January run was real, as you mentioned. But yeah, and and just to bring it all full circle, the fact that it happened on my brother's wedding weekend was just unbelievable. Um, And yes, I hope that's the best wedding gift you can get, Sam, for this coming season is the Knicks being a wonderful basketball team to watch on a night to night basis. I'll certainly wish that for you even more than I wish it for myself.
Amen. We've got basketball, real basketball in a couple of weeks. Cheers, Sam. Congrats to you. Congrats to the exciting New York Knicks. And what the hell is going on in Minnesota? I think we'll find out soon. This has been the Borstark Podcast. We love you for listening, and we will be back soon. Peace.
Boristurk.